Okay, so a little bit about Partners, which is the department that we work for through the University of Arkansas, is that we're Arkansas's only USAID, and that stands for University Center of Excellence for Developmental Disabilities. Our vision is inclusion of people with disabilities in community life, and we collaborate with many community partners to promote disability access and inclusion through training, technical assistance, resource development, and research. So, to dive into fetal alcohol spectrum disorders, we will give you just a real quick, brief recap of our last training that we did in case you weren't able to attend that one, and then we'll get into some new content. So, to review, FASD stands for Fetal Alcohol Spectrum Disorder. And remember that this is different from fetal alcohol syndrome, which is the what most of you probably prior to the last few years have heard. So used to everything was kind of classified as fetal alcohol syndrome, but it was found that really there's more of a spectrum and that fetal alcohol syndrome just makes up a tiny little portion of that. And we talked about that a lot in session one, that kind of taught us about the difference between the two of those. So fetal alcohol spectrum disorders, you can kind of think of as like an umbrella. And as you can see, FASD is the term for a collection of specific disorders. So FAS or fetal alcohol syndrome does fall under that, but FASD is not a standalone diagnosis that clinicians and providers can give. So the specific diagnosis under the umbrella are diagnosable disorders with diagnostic codes. And so our team assesses individuals for NDPAE, which is neurodevelopmental disorder exposed to with prenatal alcohol exposure. So you've got the FAS, the neurodevelopmental disorder associated with prenatal alcohol exposure, ARND, which is the alcohol-related neurodevelopmental disorder, and then the ARBD, alcohol-related birth defects. And so we specifically diagnose the NDPAE. So how does FASD affect someone's brain? Here are the different areas that are affected in the brain by prenatal alcohol exposure. So you may see dysfunction or impairment in one or more of the areas listed. This is because FASD is a neurodevelopmental disorder, which just means that prenatal exposure to alcohol while a baby was developing directly affects their brain and spinal cord development or their neurodevelopment. So how common is FASD? Anyone remember the answer to this question from session one? If you want to drop it in the chat, you can. And what is the, good, Kathy. And what is the prevalence rate or percentage of the population? You can drop those in the chat if you want as well. So 1 in 20 is the conservative estimate, but if you'll remember, it could even be more like 1 in 10. So a study showed that that's the conservative estimate is the 1 in 20 or 5% of the population, but a more realistic estimate is 1 in 10 people. So we're looking at a very large number. So as we promised last week, we're going to get a little bit more into the FASD versus autism. Because autism spectrum disorder is so commonly misdiagnosed for FASD, it's very important to understand how the symptoms overlap. Autism and FASD are both neurodevelopmental disorders. So they're both in the same chapter in the DSM-5, which is neurodevelopmental disorders. But since most of us are familiar with autism and are becoming more familiar with FASD, let's take a look at how those are similar. So if you'll look in this middle column, this is the overlapping features. So there's also going to be some differentiating features that we'll show here in just a little bit, but I first want to take a look at this middle column. So social impairments you're going to see with both of these disorders, sensory processing difficulties, executive dysfunction, a big need for structure, and then perseveration is also something that you'll see with both. With FASD, you're going to see kids that are or individuals that are overly friendly, and they're often described as being empathetic. So these kids or people are able to show empathy, whereas with ASD, they often appear disinterested in others. FASD, they're often proprioceptive or kinesthetic or hyperactive, and they like deep pressure. Whereas ASD, they're going to often have difficulty with textures, lights, and sounds. As far as the executive dysfunction differences, global difficulty with executive function. So organization's really difficult. Attention shifting is really difficult. Working memory. So these kids can remember things, but actually applying that. So like if you ask a kid a rule, they can tell you that rule verbatim, but following that rule is a different story. Impulse control is also a big one with FASD. And with autism, you're going to have difficulty with attention shifting or transitions. In FASD, for the need for structure, structure is often very necessary because of that executive dysfunction in the brain. And then in ASD, it's because of an insistence on sameness. And then perseveration, you're going to see in FASD where they may repeat things due to that receptive language impairment, where in ASD, it's going to be more scripting or echolalia.
All right. Like Leslie said, I'm Natalie Welcher. I am a speech language pathologist, and we are going to take a look at executive function. And if you are not familiar with it, I really hope that you will be by the end of this because honestly, in my opinion, it's what makes our world go round every single day. But it's how we think and function together. And the key word with that is how. So, Leslie kind of recapped some FASD stuff that we learned in the first session. So, I'm going to recap quickly the diagnostic criteria that we follow in order to make that diagnosis of NDPAE, like Leslie mentioned, which is one of the fetal alcohol spectrum disorders under that umbrella we showed. So we have three main areas or categories, and the first one is neurocognition, and then we have self-regulation, and then the third is that adaptive function. So when we are talking about a neurocognitive impairment or cognitive impairment in general, there are some specific areas or skills within that category that we're looking for or assessing and things like that, which we are going to target executive function and take a deep dive into how dysfunction can look and then how that plays into self-regulation and other areas of an individual's life. Okay, so since we are all adults on here, I'm going to put this in an analogy that grown-ups would understand easiest. So when we think of executive functions, I want you to think about why they're important. And the best way to think about why they are important is if you are working at a company, school, wherever, you likely have an administrative assistant of some sort. Maybe you have one personally, maybe your building or company has one overall. But this administrative assistant doesn't get to clock out at 5 o'clock every day. He or she is working 24/7, 360 days a year for not just one company, but like multiple companies. So if you think about your own life, you have your job, so you're an employee or maybe an employer, maybe you're a parent or a caregiver, maybe you're part of committees, maybe you interact with different community groups, you hold different roles or you have different jobs in your life aside from the one that provides you a paycheck. So this administrative assistant, their job is to make sure that everything runs smoothly in their business or company every single day. And if it doesn't, I can guarantee you that boss or CEO is going to make sure that they hear about it and it's not going to be good. It's going to be a bad day. So these examples of these specific kind of skills are scheduling, planning, problem solving, focusing, and we'll kind of go into that. Recalling, which is memory, like Leslie mentioned, multitasking, and then self-control. So when that boss does let you know you messed up, can you bite your tongue and not say, okay, well, I quit? But if you start thinking about your kiddos and how it relates to a child, this is anything from a morning routine to packing up at school to getting ready for soccer practice or anything like that. The smallest routine thing that they might do every single day requires all of these skills. So the next important lesson with executive functions is the development of them. So, if you're somebody that has ever said, well, that's not fair, and someone says, well, that's not fair, this is kind of where that plays into, but not really. But what I mean by that is we're not all born with the same capacity to develop these skills on our own. So my capacity that I'm born with is what I'm born with. However, my capacity might be higher than someone else's capacity that I was in a grade school classroom with. The things that could affect this capacity, there's a lot of them, but the main one is an exposure to a teratogen, or what we commonly know as alcohol, drugs, and anything that can have some kind of effect on development. So, when you're thinking about is everyone on this equal playing field, they're not, because everyone's born with different capacities of, okay, can I build these skills and how easy can I build these skills? It's not the same for everybody. Um, if you do have limited capacities, then extra support is needed for those skills because you haven't developed them, or maybe you don't develop them as easy as someone else. And this is where what we call the paradigm shift needs to happen, or everyone kind of change their thinking from, well, they're not doing it because they're not trying hard enough, or they don't want to, or they're bad, or they're just choosing to be lazy, versus, well, what's really making this behavior show up? Is it because they don't want to and they really aren't? Or do they not have that capacity to do what I'm expecting them to do? And are they also not getting the support that their brain actually needs in order to do this? So if you're not commonly familiar with executive functions, we'll keep it simple for you. We're not going to get, I'm not going to nerd out too much, even though I love talking about this and learning about it. There's three categories that you can think of when you think of executive functions. There's a lot of specific skills within each of these, but we're just going to keep it broad and simple tonight. So we have attention shifting, working memory, and then impulse control, which also means inhibition. So those are our three main categories, and then we will go into detail on what each of those mean and what they look like. Okay. So we've got this kiddo on our screen. Let's call him Caleb. Caleb is being required to have to do two things at once. So if you are in any kind of setting where you work with kids, maybe you have started them on a task and they are working, and at the same time that they're working on this assignment or task, you start giving instructions for something else, or you start expanding on something else. So they're having to work on this project, assignment, task, and they're having to listen to this new information that you're feeding them. That is what multitasking is, or doing two things at once. A fancy word for it is cognitive flexibility, but the best way I describe it is multitasking. So this is requiring him to have attention. And there's two types of attention. There's sustained attention. So can I sit here and watch an hour and a half long movie and not get distracted? Can I sit here and listen to my teacher give me a lecture for however many minutes and not get distracted? Then there's that shifting attention, which is, could I be doing something, shift to something else, and be able to shift back and pick up where I left off? Or can I shift between two things at one time? So while you think that your kid is hard at work doing what you told them to do, and then you start saying, okay, and remember, in 5 minutes, we're going to start packing up for the bus. So if you're a bus rider, and you start going into that whole thing, well, now they're trying to finish and keep up with what you're saying, and maybe they do need to stop and listen to you, but maybe they're, okay, now I'm processing all those steps, and now I don't even remember where I was in my first task. So then whenever you say, Caleb, I told you if you're a bus rider to, after you turn that in, stand up, push your chair in, go get your backpack and go stand against the wall. He's thinking, yeah, but then 2 minutes before that, you told me that I had to do numbers 1 through 5 before, and so he is frustrated because it was like I was trying to juggle two things and I just didn't have the capacity to do it that easy. So to get a little nerdy on you, this pretty little diagram is the working memory model. And I love this model because I can break it down in a simple form, but looking at it, you're kind of like, oh my gosh, that's kind of a lot. And there's a bunch of arrows, and now I'm getting crisscrossed. And what does this all mean? Some of these words, I don't know what that means. That is the complexity of working memory, but we're going to make it really easy. So, working memory is not just remembering something or storing something, but it's manipulating it at the same time. So your working memory is working right now. And it's similar to short-term memory, but a little bit shorter than in time span than that. So everything that I'm saying, so what you're hearing or this phonological loop, your brain is taking that information, processing the words coming out of my mouth and the sounds, and then it's going to this central executive, which the best way to describe the central executive, it's kind of like your decision maker, like your secretary, if you will. Then at the same time, I'm showing you a PowerPoint. So you are seeing visual things on your screen, and that is your visuospatial sketch pad. I'm getting ahead of myself. So now you've got two things coming at your secretary. You've got what you're hearing and what you're seeing. And at the same time, maybe you're at home right now and you have kids running around, or your dogs are wanting to play, or you're trying to get dinner going or whatever. So there's all sorts of sensory inputs. Like right now, I can hear the TV in my living room, and I can hear the dog trying to get in my office. So I'm having to block those things out, because what if that's a threat? What if my brain just totally blanks out and I don't smell smoke, or I don't hear a police siren or whatever? So I'm focused, but then I'm also getting input whether I want it or not. That's also going to my secretary. Then this secretary is trying to decide, should I keep this information or should I get rid of it? Because I've only got so much space for it. It's kind of like you run out of room on your phone for storage or your computer for storage. She's only got so much room to hold all of this. So, in order to decide if I should keep it or trash it, she's going to use your long-term memory to see if there's anything that you can use to make this stuff stick. But if your capacity is smaller, it's going to be really hard for her to hold anything for very long. So she's probably going to get rid of a lot of stuff so she can just focus on what she is able to store. And I know that was kind of a lot. So think of it this way. You're hearing stuff all the time, you're taking stuff in visually all the time, and you can never know what's going on around you because you're in different environments, whether they're busy, loud, crazy, chaotic. All of this is coming into your brain and it can only handle so much. Maybe I can handle more than you can handle. So, three-step directions for me, easy peasy. I have no problem with it. But three-step directions for someone else, they probably got one of those three steps because they didn't have the capacity and maybe some that attention was too hard to shift back and forth. So they only heard your first step and not step two and three. So Caleb's back. And Caleb looks like he's thinking, he's about to get up, he's about to be up to something. This executive function is inhibition, or what we call self-control or impulse control. Maybe there's some people in your life that you would say, yeah, they're pretty impulsive. And it's probably because they don't have good self-control or inhibition. So right now, it looks like Caleb's up to something. And there is nothing in his brain, so that signal from his brain is not being sent quick enough to say, hey, stop, don't do that. That's not a good idea. It's either going to get you in trouble, it's going to hurt you, it's going to hurt someone else's feelings, whatever the situation. That is what the job of self-control is, to make us stop and think before we do something that could cause a consequence or something like that. This isn't just if I think it all on my own, then something's going to tell me to stop. So it's not just my own actions, it's also my responses. Anytime I've talked about this, there are certain things in my life. For example, my little sister, I'm very protective of her. So when something happens with her, it's like inhibition. I don't have as much of it because my emotions take over and I'm responding a lot quicker and maybe more impulsively in that situation than I would someone else. So you might respond in different ways and your self-control looks different in different situations. So it can be your own actions or it could be your responses to something else, whether it's what somebody says or what happens. It just kind of varies. So those were the three main types: attention, working memory, and then inhibition. When those skills aren't working the way that we want them to, or somebody is expecting that they work, then we would describe this as executive dysfunction. So they're not working, they're not functioning properly, or we would have an impairment in those skills. Like I said earlier, the shifting and thinking is this willful behavior. And that's why, he threw the wad of paper across my classroom and thought he could make it like a basketball, even though I've told him 10 times not to. Is he, not listening to me, but really he's not storing all the steps that I'm giving? Is she not going back to her desk and getting back to what I told her to do after I called her up to my desk because she just doesn't think she needs to do it and she'd rather do something else because she's going over there and picking out a library book now and I never told her to do that? Or is it she was started on something, she shifted to what I needed her to work on, and then I didn't tell her, hey, now that we're finished, go back and finish your, whatever y'all were working on. Versus now she's like, okay, I don't know what to do next, but I know in our free time we can get library books, so I guess I'll do that. So it's looking at, is this willful behavior or is there some executive dysfunction that maybe I need to help this kiddo with, or I need to help this individual with, maybe that you work with. Um, all of those things are connected, so it's a domino effect. If one of them doesn't work, well, likely another one's not going to work. And I can promise you, when our brains don't work the way we want them to, or when we get in trouble because they don't work how we want them to or expected to, It really frustrates us. When I forget things, I get so frustrated because I'm like, oh, why did you forget that? You knew that was so important. So then your emotions take over. That's when we start thinking about regulation and what dysregulation can cause. Um, the key thing that I want to just end with on this is this bottom bullet that says limited communication between brain areas. If you take away anything, I want you to take away this. Individuals with FASD, you have your frontal lobe, which is where all of your executive functions are. Then in another part of your brain is your emotional system, or your limbic system is what it's called. And these two parts of the brains communicate to each other through pathways or like through a road. Say there's a highway from your emotional system to your frontal lobe. So your logic and your emotions. If you have an FASD, the communication or the road between these two systems, a lot of times there's a wreck, a lot of times there's construction, a lot of times it's underwater, whatever, and they cannot communicate to each other. It's like someone comes in and just blocks it. Um, so whenever these, executive functions aren't working and I start getting frustrated, then it can't communicate to say, hey, it's okay, calm down. We can problem solve through this. We can work through this, whatever that looks like. It's just our emotions take over and our logic is shut off. We don't have access to it because we don't have that connection between the two. Okay, self-regulation. This is how we feel with our mind and our body at the same time. So we're jumping from neurocognition to self-regulation and how an impairment in this might look like for an individual with an FASD. Then we're going to talk about how we can support these impairments. Okay, so in our FASD world, there are typically two types of ways that an individual can show dysregulation. So these are going to be signs of dysregulation. The first way, and it's a spectrum, so you can kind of go between the two or be in the middle or whatever. But we have externalizers. So they are showing their emotions and their feelings and all the things externally. Maybe this is verbally, so they're yelling or screaming, or maybe their verbal words of choice aren't very nice and appropriate. Um, they can be physical. They can show their dysregulation through destroying things, whether that's property or walls or whatever that looks like. Elopement, so they are gone with the wind kind of thing. They have got to get out of whatever situation they are in, and that's just what their brain tells them to do. You've got to get out of here. You got to run. And if you're familiar with like fight or flight, it's kind of that same scenario. And then extreme hyperactivity. So now we are just running on adrenaline and we're into everything. We're running around, whatever that looks like in terms of that individual. And then on the opposite end of the spectrum, you could have an internalizer. So this is someone that withdraws. I'm internalizing all my emotions. I'm just taking it all with me, kind of thing. Externalizers, you can see it from 10 miles away that they're dysregulated. An internalizer, it might not be that easy. This could also be refusal. Nope, I'm not doing it. I'm done. I'm just over it. I'm going to my room, whatever. Anxiety, which is a very common co-occurring condition with FASD. Depression. self-blame. Oh, got ahead of myself. So you can kind of see the two ends of the spectrum. Maybe you're kind of thinking of some kiddos or some individuals that you know, and you're like, oh, yeah, they kind of check all the boxes for maybe an externalizer or maybe an internalizer. That is how they are showing and communicating any kind of dysregulation in their mind and their body. So, what do you do when someone that you care about, interact with, love is dysregulated? It's like, well, I don't want them to hurt themselves. I don't want them to, punch a hole through the door, whatever that looks like. I don't want them to scream that word out loud in the supermarket. How do you regulate them? Because the sad part is they cannot regulate themselves. They need co-regulation. So this co-regulation is going to come from the environment that they're in, or whoever is in that environment that's taking care of them or can relate to them, whatever. This could be a teacher, a parent, a coworker, a friend. Um, the kicker with this is you have to be regulated in order to help them regulate. So we are the calm to their storm. If you come in guns blazing, then you're just adding gas to the fire kind of thing. You must stay regulated in order to help them regulate themselves. Um, the other thing with this is, so we have Caleb again. He is obviously dysregulated. He's externalizing those feelings. He's frustrated. He's mad. It looks like he's yelling. Maybe he's hitting himself, or maybe he wants to pull his hair out. Um, and it can't just be, well, he only acts like this here, or he only acts like this there. If he's only acting certain ways in certain places, it might be because he's getting the support he needs in that environment, and we don't see dysregulation. So this has to happen across the board if we're wanting to help these kiddos. And it's not a one size fits all. If I start telling Caleb, just take a deep breath, just count to 10, that might be his kryptonite because he's like, that is not what I want to hear right now. It might work for somebody else, but it's not working for me. So this isn't just, okay, whatever works for you works for him, or what works for one sibling might not work for another. We have to really dive deep into the kids' needs, the individual's needs, and what works best for them, to make change happen and make them feel supported.
All right. Hi, everyone. I'm Tiffany. So Natalie talked a lot about executive dysfunction and some of the issues that we can see in some kids with FASD with it. But then what do you do, right? Like these kids have to go to school, they have to live at home, like you're kind of stuck. And how do you deal with some of these symptoms that kids have? So we're going to talk about some strategies that people can use in the classroom. Okay, so here's a list of really great student supports, and we'll just go through them kind of quickly. Visual schedules are great. I kind of think like what we do in kindergarten classrooms, we should just continue doing like throughout school for everyone. Because if you think in kindergarten classroom, it's very structured, it's very routine. We have visual schedules that have pictures of what's coming next. We give kids lots of reminders for what's coming next. We talk a lot about what are the expectations for what's coming next. And at some point in school, we just kind of stop doing that and assume that they can do that on their own. And kids that have FASD or other issues that cause executive dysfunction really, really struggle with that and really do still need those supports as they get older. So having a visual schedule or like a visual checklist, things like if you have homework assignments, like having a planner is great for older kids. They can check off when they get assignments done. Timers are really great. I set timers for myself, and I am definitely not a child, because it keeps me on track and it gives me a time limit where I know like this is what I need to do, and I only need to do it for this specific amount of time. And when it's over, I can be done with the activity. Kids can tend to be pretty disorganized. So any way you can help them organize their supplies is going to be great. So that looks different in every classroom and it looks different depending on age, right? And so when we have little kids, they might have a cubby. just having a space and saying this is your cubby might not be enough. Like you might need to have a hook for your coat, and you might need to have a hook for your backpack, and you might need to have a place for your shoes. Like you might need to break it down into little pieces for them. As kids get older, backpacks, like things just get thrown in backpacks, assignments get missed, nothing comes home. So having a planner or having some type of binder that things can be organized can really, really help. Um, People in general don't love transitions. Like no one really loves transitions, I don't think. So having verbal warnings that transitions are coming up can help. So, in 5 minutes, we're going to go to lunch, like letting people know what's going to come up before it happens. If you've ever parented small children, you've probably done this anytime you've been in public. You give like the 5 minute warning, like in 5 minutes, it's time to put on our coat and we're going to leave. Continue to do those verbal warnings for transitions in other aspects of life. I have 2 children that have an FASD, so I'm kind of living this at home, and we have verbal warnings for everything. Like in 5 minutes, we're going to brush our teeth. In 5 minutes, we're going to put on our pajamas. The next thing we're going to do is get into bed and read a book. Like just telling them always what's coming next so they know what to expect. Sensory supports can look like lots of things. I think it's really cool now because we're so more as a society in tune to sensory needs of kids than we were like 10 years ago. Like everybody knows what a fidget spinner is now, right? Like there's so many sensory supports that people can use in classrooms. There's like rubber bands you can put on the legs of chairs so kids can like bounce their feet on there. There's fidget toys, there's weighted lap stuffed animals. I mean, there's so many different things that you can use. And shout out to the occupational therapists because they are great at figuring out sensory supports for kids that have these kind of needs. Routine is so important. Again, it's like when you parent little children, they love routine, they thrive on routine, and they really need routine to everything to stay kind of calm. That doesn't go away when they get older. So keeping a routine, having the same things happening throughout the day is really important. And I think schools naturally are pretty good at that because like in elementary school, like you start with math and then you move to science, then you move to history, and you do the same thing every day. And so kind of having that routine built in can be really, really helpful. And then tactile cues. I was thinking of like, how do people use this in the classroom earlier today? And like the first one that came to my mind is like one of my children is very unfocused. He has lots of ADHD, and the teacher will consistently like just touch him on the shoulder, like, hey, time to focus on this assignment. Hey, time to go to recess, and that just kind of physical touch or physical presence can really help refocus him into what he needs to do and get him kind of back on track. So we need to have appropriate expectations for your students. There's a picture that I really like, and I have it actually hanging on my refrigerator as a constant reminder to myself, but it has like chronological age. So like a kid might be 18 years old, but his emotional development might be that of a 10-year-old, and his physical development might be that of a 12-year-old. So you can't necessarily expect an 18-year-old to act like what we think a neurotypical 18-year-old would act like. We need to break down our expectations for what the child is capable of. If we place too high of expectations on them, they're not going to be able to meet it, and it's just going to cause dysregulation and stress for everybody involved. Remind kids of what to expect before the activity happens. So instead of saying like time to go to lunch and all the kids like just jump up and start running down the hall to the lunchroom, right? Like we're going to go to lunch, we're going to walk in a straight line to the lunchroom, like letting them know the expectations. We do this again, if you parent small children, you have probably done this when you go to a birthday party. These are the expectations for how you're going to act in public, right? Those don't need to stop when your child turns like the magical 6 or whatever it is. Like those can continue throughout life for people who need them. Lots of schools use kind of punitive or almost like public shaming strategies for behavior management, and they're just really not great for our type of kids. So we see these as like the clip up, clip down system where they have a close like a what are those things called? Close, you know what I'm talking about. It's like
Clothespin.
clothespin, yeah, clothespin. Like you have clothespins and you have, if you do good, you put the clothespin up higher on the chart. And if you have bad issues, the clothespin goes down lower. sticker charts, so where you can like get stickers if you're doing great things. There's one that a school uses called Angel Falling from Heaven. So like anytime that the kid does something like bad, like your angel's falling from heaven. My kid personally, I was talking earlier to Natalie and Leslie, went to a school that had a bad book. And so anytime you did anything that was considered bad, they wrote your name in this bad book. And it was publicly available for everyone to see how many times you were bad because you were in the bad book. Anytime where you have systems where you can lose points, so like Dojo is a really popular program that a lot of schools use where you can earn points. And like the earning part is cool, and a lot of kids work really well for the earning part. The problem is the taking away part because the kids have struggles, and taking away them is not going to improve their behavior at all. Like they're still going to have symptoms of their disorder that they can't control. So by using these kind of public shaming, punitive systems, we're really just punishing them for having a disability. We're not teaching them anything through that. So if you're going to use some of these like kind of behavior systems, they really need to be reward focused and they need to be immediate rewards. Like the reward has to happen immediately and very quickly and very like clear the reason for the reward. Just the taking away stuff is not ever really good. I love when teachers and parents can come together and really work on deciding what works for kids. So there's so many strategies that I do at home that I share with teachers. And I'm like, look, I know my kid deals with this kind of behavior, and this is how we deal with it at home. And it works really well. And teachers that are receptive to that are fantastic. Like huge shout out to the teachers who are willing to take parents' opinions into consideration. It also works vice versa. Like I've talked to teachers and I say, this is something that we're dealing with at home when it comes to homework. Like, how are you managing this at school? And they'll say, well, this is the strategy I use to get them to focus to do whatever assignment we want them to do. And I'll be like, perfect. Like I'm going to implement the same thing at home. And so it's a really great opportunity to work with each other to make a successful environment for the kid. And because these kids really thrive on routine, if you can do the same type of thing at home and at school and at church and at all the other places that they are, kind of the better off they're going to be. Along with that kind of routine repetition. So they need lots and lots of more repetition than a neurotypical child would need. So that is with everything, like learning things needs a lot more repetition. One of the kind of complaints or symptoms we see a lot are kids who can do things at school, like they're working on math assignments and at school that they can do them, but then they come home, 5 hours later and they no longer can remember how to do that assignment for their homework. It's just going to take a lot of repetition for them to learn the skill that they need to do. So a lot of those classroom strategies you can implement at home too. Like I said, if you can do the same thing in the classroom at home, it really, really works really great. So we'll just talk about a few home strategies that can work for children as well. All right. If you have children period, a calendar is probably going to be useful, honestly. If you have a child with special health care needs, a calendar is going to be really important for you because there's a lot to keep track of and there's a lot to know what's coming up. Having a calendar allows you to be able to give your child those warnings or those the information they need for things that are coming in the future. You have to be a little kind of careful with this because some kids can hyperfixate on things. So like you want to tell them something's coming up and you can show them the calendar, in 4 days, this event is happening. But at the same time, sometimes kids get fixated on it and they are going to just talk about that event nonstop until it comes up. But still knowing something's on the horizon can be really helpful. And a calendar allows them to visually see that instead of just being told 4 days from now. We live in the great world of apps, like the internet can be a really wonderful thing and a really terrible thing, both at the same time. But there's so many great apps that make lots of resources available to us. So like Alexa can be super helpful for parents and children as well. I love the fact that I can have an alarm on my phone and I don't have to set like my kitchen timer or anything because anywhere I go, I can have the same alarm, the same situation, no matter where it is. And that's really helpful for that sameness and routine for my children. We have lots of lists. So, like in my bathroom, I have a list of how to brush your teeth. To give you an idea, my kids that have FASD are 9 and 11. And so they still do need a list that says, first thing you do is wet your toothbrush. Second thing you do is you put your toothpaste on your toothbrush. Third thing you do is you brush the front of your teeth. Like they need it broken down into a list that they can follow. We also have a list for how to get ready in the morning, and we have a list for how to go to bed at night. So having lists of very simple one-step kind of instructions that they can follow is really, really useful. And then once they use it so many times, it just becomes routine, but they still heavily rely on that. I have no doubt that if I remove my how to get ready in the morning list right now, even though we've used it for 5 years, my kids would struggle. Um, Things that are easy to find. So being organized is always helpful to everyone, right? Some of us are just naturally better at it than others. But having things in places that they can find them is great. So like in my bathroom, all of my kids have a cup, and the cup has their toothbrush in it, and a cup has their individual toothpaste in it. And it's on the counter so they can visually see it when they go to the bathroom, right? If I had toothbrushes in the medicine cabinet or in a cabinet, they wouldn't see it and they wouldn't forget it was there and it wouldn't happen. So things that they can access really easily. Same thing, like we have a spot where shoes go in our house, and it's like right inside their bedroom door, and that's where shoes always go. We always know where they're at. They're always there and they're always visible. Everybody has an individual hook for their jacket. So that way we don't have to lose jackets and can't find them. Like everybody knows where everything is. And it took a lot of time to be able to put those systems in place. But then once they were in place and it was a routine, it made life a lot easier. Timers, I should have brought my timer down to the office, honestly, to show you. I have a big timer. It's like this big, and it was like $15 on Amazon. It was probably the best purchase I've ever made in my life. But it's a really cool timer because it has a big knob and you can turn it and it will show you red. So you can turn it for like 15 minutes and it will show red. And as the time goes, the red gets smaller and smaller and smaller until it buzzes at the end of it, it rings. If I tell my kids, and I tell them all the time, we're going to leave in 5 minutes, 5 minutes doesn't really mean a lot to them. That's a very abstract concept of what 5 minutes is. So if I can show them and they can like visibly see the 5 minutes ticking down, that makes sense to them. When I am in public, unfortunately, I can't bring my like 1 foot timer with me everywhere, but I have an app on my phone and I do the same thing. I use the same thing. So even though it's great to give those warnings of things that are going to come in the future, you have to remember that time can be difficult. And so having visual timer can be really helpful. Routine, like I can't stress how important routine is enough. It just really is. It takes a long time to get the routine, but once you get the routine, it will make your life so much better. Sensory supports. If your teacher has great sensory supports that are working in the classroom, like by all means use them at home and vice versa. If something works really well at home, ask if the teacher will be willing to use it in their classroom. Because once you find something that works, it generally works. And it works in lots of different situations. So whatever sensory supports your child needs, some people seek sensory things and some people avoid sensory things. So you just have to be really individualized with what your child needs. And the last is patience. It's hard. Like I know a lot of you guys have children that are on this call, and parenting period is hard. Like no one prepares you for how hard parenting is. When you parent children who have FASD or executive dysfunction for whatever reason, it's extra hard and you have to give yourself a lot of grace. It can be really easy to feel like you're doing a terrible job as a parent. I promise you, the fact that if you're a parent and you're here, like you want to learn about this and you want to do better, you are a great parent for your child. You wouldn't be here if this wasn't important to you. So having patience and giving yourself grace is really important. Some other ideas, so like being very clear on your expectations, using short instructions. So lecturing these children will never work. Like, don't think you're going to sit down and give them a 10-minute lecture on how they can improve their issues. It's not going to work at all. Using very short, one-step instructions is going to be much more useful. Plain language, so things like Sarcasm generally doesn't go over real well. Like they don't naturally understand sarcasm. Being very clear and black and white with what you're talking about is much more important. Um, Putting things in a positive light more than a negative light is important too. So I give you an example. If you want a kid to walk, it's better to say walk instead of saying don't run. They will latch onto the walk part than the don't do something part. So putting it in the positive, like what you want them to do, is more important. That transition, what's coming next, make sure you remind them. Avoid triggers. If you parent children with an FASD, you're going to learn there are certain triggers that are going to cause them to be dysregulated. A lot of parenting a child with an FASD is just thinking ahead on what could trigger them and trying to avoid that from happening. So if you know what they are, that's amazing and you're ahead of the game. Co-regulation, when your kid is really just melting down, it's very easy for you to melt down yourself. And can be very, very hard for you to be calm and regulated. If you are not going to be regulated, your kid is not going to be regulated. So we have to try to be the adult and try to be the big one and try to use our calming skills to get ourselves regulated so that we can regulate our children. Follow the child's lead. I mean, this goes for everything, all this, since all the situations you can think of, but we see this a lot in like play, what they want to do with other people. If you can just kind of go along with what they want and see how they are acting in that situation and kind of run with it, it can be really useful. And then we said this one, but again, it's way worth mentioning. Give yourself lots of grace. Okay, so that's it. We got it done just a little bit after 7, which I'm sorry about because we started a little bit late. But if you guys wouldn't mind, it would be fantastic if you would just take a quick minute to do the survey. It's really simple and straightforward. It's anonymous, so you don't have to worry about your answers or anything. And it will literally just take you a minute, and we would greatly appreciate it. If anyone has any questions, feel free to ask them now. You can put them in the chat. You are welcome to unmute and ask questions. We will take anything that you have.
I'm going to give everyone a few more seconds to try to get this survey up and going. And then the next slide will also be a QR code. And it is an executive function ebook resource. So everything that I was kind of rambling on about, you could have a copy that you could have for yourself or share with others. And it puts executive functions in a really easy way to understand. And my favorite part is it applies it to a child and throughout their whole entire day. And it'll pinpoint, okay, while he's doing this, these are the executive functions at work. And it really shows you that these are skills that are 24/7 and they can just so easily be impacted by the smallest of things. And so that'll be on the next slide for everyone to have. So hopefully everyone was able to get this survey going. And here is your ebook. And it'll probably take you to the website. Just scroll down just a little bit, and there is a link that is like embedded in there, and you just click it and it'll download as a PDF file. So you can have it electronically and it's free.
Natalie, is this the same survey that they did the first time?
Yes, it should be the same.
Okay.
Is it not letting people respond if they've already responded?
No, someone just asked if it was a different survey.
Okay.
It's
Wanted
not
to
letting
confirm.
us respond. It says that
Oh.
we already took it
Okay.
this time.
Well,
Same.
check you out. Easy then. Easiest survey you've ever been asked to take. Simple. Thank you so much for trying to do it.
The ebook's not working?
Technology
will.
is not our friend today.
Yeah, when I send out the slides, okay. When I send out the slides, I will also attach the ebook for you.
Thank you everyone for coming. We hope you have a really great evening and the rest of your night.